So warm welcome here to the presentation at the Bauhaus booth at the ILA. Also warm welcome to the audience at the live stream. My name is Kai Plötner. I am the coordinator of the Urban and Regional Air Mobility Research at Bauhaus Luftfahrt. And together with my colleague Colin, we would like to present you one of our studies. So maybe Colin, may you introduce you?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Colin. I'm a senior specialist at Roland Berger. And together with Bauhaus Luftfahrt, and especially Kai, we came up with a very interesting study on regional air mobility and what could make regional air mobility a game changer in the long term.
Good. So before we are starting and going into the deep dive of the study, I would like to give you a short, let's say, categorization about regional air mobility. So in fact, I mean, there is no clear definition what regional air mobility is about. So if you look, let's say, into the different, let's say, market segments, you can differentiate that to different parameters. So one parameter is number of seats. So if we have, let's say, more than 19 seats on the aircraft, then we are calling it regional air transport. So we are following the certification specification of the CS25. And if we go, let's say, to smaller ones like UAVs and also urban air mobility, where we're talking about carrying 2 to 4 people, mostly vertically, then we are in that sector. And between these two segments, there is, let's say, an area where we call it and where we define it as regional air mobility. So looking at transporting people, less than 19 people with a range of 100, 300 and even more. So in that we have also differentiated into two segments. So regional air mobility on the short distance, where we can also find vertical takeoff and landing capability of the vehicles. And if we go to the long distance one, so exceeding roughly 300 kilometers, then we are in the area of conventional takeoff and landing or short takeoff and landing. And then the question is arising, I mean, what is the market today? And if we look at the air transport sector as a whole, I mean, there are key indicators where we can see that roughly 10% of the seats are offered in air transport on sectors on the stage length of 400 kilometers or less. Roughly 19% of the departures we can see worldwide are operated on flights which are going less than 400 kilometers. And if we look on the transport capacity measured like available seat kilometers, then it's just only a shy of 2% offered in that segment. If we assume, for example, we have an itinerary with a one-stop operation where we say maybe the passengers are traveling 400 to 800 kilometers, then we are in the order of magnitude of 9–10% of the air transport capacity offered today. So, and how does it translate into the fleet? So this is on the right-hand side. We show you the development of civil 90-seater aircraft development since the last 60 years. And you can see that it started some around the 60s with a steep incline to the late 1990s. And after the 1990s, we saw a steady decline in the fleet development because low-cost air carriers entered the market. They used larger aircraft like a 50-seater, 70-seater, 100-seater and even more. So the regional airlines offering these kind of smaller aircraft, they are operating, let's say, on higher cost, higher operating cost. So they were forced to reduce their operation, reduce the frequency, and the result is also a shrinking fleet. So the question is, I mean, why do we think there is a potential that regional air mobility might be unlocked? And if you just look, let's say, into two fundamental figures, the one is travel time saving. I mean, this is something, let's say, aviation is all about. We want to fly faster or travel faster. And then the question is arising is how much energy are we consuming? So on the left-hand side, you can see travel time savings from door to door. The colorish bars is the in-vehicle time, so in the car, in the aircraft, in the train. Everything on the gray is everything regarding access to the mode, egress, and buffer times. And what you can grab out of that is what is specifically, let's say, to aviation, we have large duration of access and egress time. Compare that to car. And if you look, let's say, into the example we have here, like 250 kilometers, this is something where I say, look, we are pretty much competitive to cars. We are a little bit faster than aviation. and we are definitely faster than regional trains. And if you look into on the right-hand side to the emissions, there are 3 large bars where if we can compete or if we can shift passengers from mode of transport who are running on combustion engines, then regional air mobility is superb in terms of emissions. However, I mean, there's also electrification going on the other modes of transport. So if we have a direct competition to high-speed trains, if we have a direct competition to regional trains, I mean, then also we have to admit, I mean, we're still flying, we still consume a little bit more energy than those mode of transport. However, if you look at the electric cars, we are really competitive compared to electrically driven electric cars. So these are the examples given for for Germany. So we have the luxury of having cars, high-speed trains, and also regional trains. But if you look throughout the world, I mean, not every region has this luxury to have, let's say, this mix of mode of transport. So the question is now also, I mean, if we know, okay, this is quite, let's say, competitive, do we see any market change? And I really would like to hand over now to Colin.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And we definitely took a look at the overall market and screened the global projects. So who's actually working on what kind of regional air or even urban air mobility project. And what we can see here is that this topic has been active for decades. So research and development expenses are actually flowing into the space already starting pre-2009. But then we can see that since 2017 and especially 2022, we experienced quite a strong number of growth of projects globally. And this goes also hand in hand with overall investments that is flowing into the regional air mobility industry, mainly in all electric propulsion and also hybrid propulsion, and only a tiny bit into the hydrogen area. This makes totally sense, as for example with hydrogen, the technological limitations are still quite high, and it's not possible, at least in the next 3 to 5 years, to offer a regional air mobility aircraft based on hydrogen propulsion. And this is the opposite is true for the electric and hybrid electric propulsion systems, where we do see, for example, with Lilium, Volocopter, Joby, and so on, projects that will most likely be launched within this decade, as they obviously also offer ranges which are more easy to serve with electric propulsion, for example. Now, if we take a look at the investment market here, and we split it by use case. So we have the urban air mobility use case, which we defined as ranges less than 100 kilometers. Then we have the regional air mobility short distance use case, which is less than 300 kilometers. The regional air mobility long distance use case with more than 300 kilometers, and then the regional air transport use case serving greater distances. And what's very interesting here to see is that the urban air mobility use case as well as the regional air mobility short distance use case received most funding in the last 10 years. Despite the fact that most projects are actually situated in the regional air mobility short distance and regional air mobility long distance use cases. And now if we are turning a look to the right, the regional air mobility long distance does not receive so much venture capital funding, for example. And this is somehow surprising. So we have lots of projects focusing on the right side, but less projects on the left side. But there seems to be a gap in terms of where investment or where the money is going towards. From a company point of view, going to the right side is quite logical because you can use existing infrastructure. So for the urban air mobility case, you depend on physical infrastructure in cities, such as vertiports and so on. So this makes the case and the market entry way more difficult compared to the regional air mobility long distance or short distance cases, where you can simply use existing small regional airports, for example. And you only need to upgrade these regional airports, for example, with electric or later on hydrogen facilities. In the long term, though, we do expect that this dilemma or gap is shifting further to the right, just because the learnings that is gained from the urban air mobility use case, for example, could be transferred to the longer ranges, and then also investors will see that there is or is even a greater potential for the regional air mobility long distance case. Now coming to or looking at the drivers. So what are the drivers that could unlock regional air mobility? In total, we have seven drivers here. Obviously, the first one is it needs to be low operating costs, and we need to have green energy that's first available for this use case, and second, it is also affordable. The second point is we need to have airport access and integration, so that means we need to connect it also with the ground mobility use case. We need to be able to install charging infrastructure. We need to include ground mobility feeder so that people are actually channeled to these airports. The third one, we do see technological advancements in battery technology, for example, especially when we look at the battery density. We do expect that this will increase from today's 250 watt per kilogram up to 400 watt per kilogram, and then the longer ranges are more suitable. Then if we look to the right-hand side, the market drivers that support the regional air mobility use case. First, we see that digitalization is actually arriving, also in Germany, slowly, but it's arriving. And what we need is an intermodal and multimodal connection. So to really offer a time advantage for these travelers. That means we need to set up, for example, an intermodal or multimodal platform that connects the regional air mobility with ground transportation like trains, ride-hailers, bus systems, and so on. Second driver could be that when we look at government strategies, they decide where to invest, in which infrastructure types, and usually when a government invests in, for example, train tracks, it takes first very long, 30 years, for example, and it requires a huge amount of investment. And if you have to decide today, and you know the train tracks are being ready in 20 or 30 years, maybe the market has already completely changed. And that in areas like urban or rural areas where not as many people live. And therefore, the air mobility use case, especially the regional air mobility use case, could provide a solution for the government, as you just don't need to set up and invest in all the infrastructure, because we do have regional airports already there, and we now only need to connect them and enable it, that people are actually able to use it. The third one is that we do see on all fronts that sustainable travel actually gains momentum at the moment. So if we look at Airbus, Boeing, and so on, they all invest in more efficient aircrafts, in sustainable aviation fuel, and so on. And this will further be a driver to unlock regional air mobility. And the last one, and that's also quite an important one, is that people are more willing to pay for sustainable products. So if you really make the case that regional air mobility is more sustainable compared to an internal combustion engine vehicle, then most likely, and especially the new generation, will be willing to pay a premium for that type of transport. And then we also looked at the overall market. So the drivers that I just outlined are the foundation. And then we have three key dimensions that needs to that needs to met. First is that the aviation market needs to grow continuously. The second one is we need to have available green energy at an affordable price point. And the last one is that the regional air mobility transport option obviously needs to be comparable to alternative transport modes. So we took a look at the overall market. How big could it be? How big could it evolve in the future? And we divided it into a base case, a downside case, and an upside case. The base case is going up to 25 billion market potential in 2050 and is based on the assumption that the overall aviation market will come back from its post-COVID market, and that the green energy will be widely available and only experience similar price increases as experienced in the past. Then we have the downside case, which we predict with a market potential of roughly 10 billion US dollar, which is based on the assumption that the energy prices will increase substantially, especially for green energy, that the regulator will decide which transport mode will receive green energy, so the green energy will be prioritized to the most efficient transport mode. And we also included the assumption that the overall aviation market will experience a decline in growth, because otherwise you most likely will not meet the net zero climate goals 2050. And the last one is the most optimistic case, the upside case, which would lead in a market potential of 50 billion US dollar in 2050, which is based on the assumption that we have green energy widely available, so we can use it for all different types of transport modes. The energy prices will remain relatively stable. The aviation market will grow continuously as in the past, and the regional air mobility transport mode will be affordable to the regular traveler. So it's comparable to other transport modes, such as a train or a taxi ride. And that brings us to our 6 takeaways of the regional air mobility study. And I'm handing over to Kai.
Yeah, so the first takeaway you should take with you is, since the 1998, this market is declining, so this is the first takeaway. The second one is because this decline happened on that this regional air mobility market operating on smaller aircraft, which were less competitive on an operating cost basis compared to larger aircraft, like the 50, 60, 100-seater aircraft also operating by low-cost airlines. So this was the reason why this is declining.
And if you look at today, I showed previously that we do have a lot of investments that's going into the overall regional air mobility space. And it's already in 2021, roughly 8 billion that went into regional air mobility. This is still not enough, but if it continues to increase, then it could be a game changer. And the second one is that the regional air mobility market already possesses all the other ecosystem building blocks, for example, what I outlined for the physical infrastructure, so you don't need to build new airports because we already have it. We do have the digital infrastructure, and we just need to upgrade the existing infrastructure. So it's a perfect use case if you compare it with the urban air mobility use case.
All right, and also, I mean, if you look into the future, we strongly believe that there is a possibility or an opportunity, if you look into technology advancement, to cut down the costs. So we're talking here about electric propulsion, reducing maintenance costs, but we're also talking about automation. We are also talking about digitalization, which is also reducing the effort, for example, like in designing, manufacturing future aircraft vehicles. So these are all the opportunities where we think this can lead, let's say, to operating cost reductions.
And the overall market, highly depends, like in which trajectory it goes. Either we will have a big market, a rather average market size, or a declining market. Definitely depends on the operating cost in the end of this new type of mobility. If we can reduce it and make it more comparable to existing transport modes, then we will definitely see that regional air mobility will become a game changer and can claim a market potential of roughly 50 billion US dollar. If that will not be the case, then we will most likely experience that regional air mobility remains a niche market.
So thank you so much for listening here in Berlin at the ILA and also at the live stream. If you are really curious to read more about the study, so feel free to look into the study. Thank you again. Also, thank you, Colin, for having you here and also to conduct the study together with Roland Berger. It was a pleasure. And enjoy the ILA.
Yeah, thanks. Likewise.
All right. Thank you. So, are there any questions from the audience?